In December 2011, Farming Smarter held its annual conference and trade show at the Lethbridge Lodge Hotel, bringing together over 250 agricultural professionals and over 20 speakers. The conference served to educate members of the farming community on growing trends, opportunities, and issues facing today's agricultural industry. We now take you to the Farming Smarter Conference to view the presentation of our speakers.
Thanks very much. It's my pleasure to be here, and it's great to come to another area outside of Saskatchewan and learn a bunch of things and meet some people I haven't seen for a while and some new friends as well. I'm a strange creature in that I get to travel around to lots of conferences, see lots of presentations, work for various groups, and know a little bit about a lot of things, but there's lots of things I don't know. So I'll tell you the opinions I have and the things that I think are going to be interesting and useful, and we'll kind of go from there. As mentioned, I work for a number of associations. One of them is the Inland Terminal Association of Canada. That's the 10 farmer-owned inland terminals. The one in this neck of the woods that I visited with yesterday is Lethbridge Inland Terminal. They're the ones that are at least 50% owned by producers. There's 7 in Saskatchewan, 3 in Alberta. The other ones in Alberta are Providence and Westlock. So pretty involved in the whole wheat board issue and trying to figure out how that's going to play out. Also involved as Executive Director of the Canary Seed Commission and the Mustard Commission in Saskatchewan. I'm going to talk a little bit about mustard and canary seed, especially mustard and a new crop coming up, Ethiopian mustard, which is Brassica carinata, which will be a new opportunity, hopefully, in the years to come. First commercial production coming up this year. Now, some of you have seen me in my media incarnation. I write a column for the Western Producer. I also have the pleasure of serving as editor for Farm Credit Canada's magazine, Agri-Success. So agricultural media is my background, and I also play around in the dirt. And you might wonder why I've got this ugly old equipment pictured on my PowerPoint presentation here, and because I'm kind of partial to it, it's my old junky equipment. You know, that old tandem has seen better days. We have kind of replaced that and got something better. You know, there's nothing too much wrong with that Flexicoil air drill. That's not that old. But you can see a gravity wagon in the background there. The land is all in a block, so rather than having as many trucks around, we do some stuff with gravity wagon. And then there's that old power unit on the front of that outfit there. That came off the assembly line probably the same year I came out of Ag College, and that goes back too many years, like about 1980. But the amazing thing is that, you know, those old buggers still work, and you can put auto steer in them. And I'm sure that when that thing rolled off the assembly line way back when, all those many years ago, 30 years ago, that if you'd have told somebody that old baby was going to run itself straight down a field with GPS satellite guidance someday, that people would have thought you were watching too much Star Trek. And, you know, it's just amazing where we've come from. And this area is no different than Saskatchewan. You know, you go back 100 years, we got some century farms. You go back 100 years or a little bit more than that, and what was there out in rural areas? There was diddly. You know, people with sod huts and tar paper shacks, and especially you drive around here in southern Alberta and see all the various kinds of production and what irrigation has done for this country, and beans and hay and potatoes and great production, and all the processing and all the facilities. It's pretty amazing what's been accomplished in just a little over 100 years. And sometimes I think we need to hearken back and realize how much things have changed and how much, you know, we take a lot of things for granted. So I'll talk about various things. I'm not an expert on anything, but here's something that worries me, and it's the whole Eurozone situation. Gary Pike referred to it, talked about it this morning. I think they're in a lot of trouble. I think there's more pain to come. I haven't looked at what's happened to the markets today. It's almost scary to look some days, and then it recovers the next day. And I think the U.S. is in a lot of trouble too. It is amazing to me. This is government debt to GDP ratio, and we think the states are so bad off, but measured this way, we're not a heck of a lot better than the states. The difference is that the states don't seem to realize they got a problem, and that they don't seem to have any plan for ratcheting down their ongoing deficit and fixing a $15 trillion debt problem. Nobody seems to be able to suggest that maybe you need to raise your taxes a little bit or cut down some government spending somewhere to make the two balance at some point. They seem to have a political system that's You know, again, somebody mentioned entitlement. People think that they can have low taxes and all these government services and go off and fight a bunch of very expensive wars, and somehow that they can pay for it all. And I just worry a little bit in the whole grains and oilseeds industry, which is what I'll focus on today, that some of this demand side of the equation could come back to bite us. The other thing, and it was also mentioned by Gary Pike this morning, and that is some emerging exporters. And this is exports of wheat out of Russia and Ukraine. And you see that the year they had back in 2010-11 when they had the bad drought there and they cut off exports, and that, you know, really changed the market around. But, you know, this is an area of the world that used to be our prime customer, the former Soviet Union. And now they're competing with us out of the Black Sea region, and they've got a lot of challenges. But as they get their act together, and I believe they are getting their act together, they're going to be a formidable competitor. So I know that everybody likes to tell the story about agriculture as a rosy place and it's all plus, 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 and you just have to be a farmer and the money's going to be rolling in. But there are, I think, some challenges, and people, I think, will continue to have sharp pencils to make it all work out. Let's take a look at some charts. This is the value of the Canadian dollar. Okay, we know we're kicking around about par, eh? And it wasn't too long ago, 2009, we were in the 80-cent range for the Canadian dollar. What amazes me is how a lot of the charts look very similar. Now, that's the chart on the Canadian dollar. There's the chart on crude oil prices. You know, the run-up that we saw in crude oil prices corresponded to the rise in grain prices. And the only difference right now is that crude oil prices have been rising. We're kicking around the $100 a barrel level, whereas grain prices have been actually trending down. So it's not a perfect relationship, but a lot of these things are related. We're a petrocurrency in Canada. When our dollar is high, it usually means the price of oil is high, and that usually means the world economy is doing reasonably well, so the price of commodities is up, and grain and fuel are very closely linked. Now, this is the price of corn, the futures market. And you can see that it's really, in the past year, been a corn-based rally. Back in 2008, it was very much a wheat-based rally. This time it's been very much a corn-based rally. And even though corn has come down a long way from its height back at harvest time, on an historical basis, corn is still priced very attractively, but not quite as tight as people thought. And then the demand side of the equation, you know, it's slipped. It's not everything just ratcheting higher as, you know, we might hope it would do. Ethanol production continues to be a big play in corn production. 40% of the American corn crop goes into ethanol production. That's a map of where the main part of those plants are clustered in the U.S. And there's a lot of talk. A lot of people say, oh, well, ethanol is going to disappear. You know, that demand for corn is going to go away. I don't think that's the case. Certainly, their tax incentives are going to end. But the mandate to have ethanol in their gasoline is going to continue. And so most of the analysts believe that this is what's going to happen. The blue represents ethanol from conventional, in other words, from corn. So they say, well, it's maybe not going to increase. You know, it increased dramatically for a while. It's likely to level off in the years to come. Any increase in ethanol production is likely to come from what's called advanced ethanol, which is cellulosic ethanol. You know, ethanol from corn stalks and switchgrass. And this technology, you know, I've been speaking about this for a long time. It's been 5 years away for the past 10 years. It just we never quite get there. It's not that easy to do, but it's believed to be the next wave. So even though that we might not use more corn for ethanol, most of the thinking is that we'll at least stay where we are. That new demand that really has changed the supply-demand dynamics of the grains industry is not going to collapse. It's going to be there, albeit maybe not growing. As I mentioned, the last big grain price rally in 2008 was wheat-based. And this whole graph is kind of skewed from the fact that we hit something like $25 a bushel back in February of 2008. Albeit very briefly, albeit very few people actually benefited from it, albeit there was a whole lot of speculative money that pushed it up there. And wheat prices right now, well, they've come down, but on an historical basis, wheat prices still not that bad, but certainly not a wheat-based rally. Wheat is in reasonable supply compared to the stocks-to-use ratio of a few years ago. Here's the canola price over the past year. And you can see as far as a futures price, we're actually at the low point for the year, kicking around $500 a ton on canola. Now, the only thing that's helped that as it's ratcheted down over the past few months is that basis levels have generally improved. Futures have come down, but a lot of the basis levels have narrowed to even a few positive basis levels in Western Canada. So that's mitigated the drop somewhat, but certainly if we had it to do it all over again, most of us would go back in time and sell all of our canola on the 1st of September and got a whole heck of a lot more money than we're going to get for it today. But on an historical basis, and here's the graph for the last 5 years, even though canola has come down the past year and at the low point for the year, on an historical basis, $500 a ton canola is still a pretty sweet price. It's just that it's not as sweet as it was when it was up around $600 a ton. Wheat prices. Now these are Saskatchewan prices, so you need to add about 20 cents a bushel to these to be an Alberta average price, because Saskatchewan pays a little bit higher freight than you, and these are average Saskatchewan prices. So the last pool return outlook that came out from the Canadian Wheat Board, wheat, durum, especially durum, and barley all dropped a bit. That's their wild-ass guess for where prices are going to end up in the current year. That's their WAG. But they've got a lot of that sold now, so they're getting a little more certain. That number is getting a little bit firmer than it would have been, but it's been going the wrong direction. Like all the other grain prices, it's been dropping. And with a fixed price contract, what could you have locked in on, number one? You probably could have locked in $8.20 or $8.30 or $8.40 a bushel if you'd have acted at the right time. And that's no different than how the world is going to work after the 1st of August next year in an open market. Yeah, you're going to have different players and everybody offering different things, but it's going to be no different than canola. It's going to be no different than your wheat with fixed price contracts. You're going to have to make a decision. And if you're smart enough to always catch the top, come talk to me. I want to know how you do it. It's not a very easy thing to do. You catch some good ones. You try to be in the top third. You do your research. There's going to be a lot more brokers out there and companies offering advice, trying to get you into that top third rather than struggling and selling your grain at the bottom. There is a heck of a big difference in how you market as to what the bottom line of your farm is going to look like. Here's durum. Now, the durum price in Saskatchewan and Alberta is not that much different because a lot of this product moves east rather than west. Durum has come down sharply, but still a pretty strong premium to spring wheat prices. And I know Gary Pike mentioned it this morning. I was sitting beside a Saskatchewan seed grower who said that everybody's cleaning mass amounts of durum. I worry about how much durum might go into the ground this spring, because everybody looks at this signal. Man, it's almost $2. It's $2 a bushel, more than $2 a bushel over spring wheat. Why wouldn't you grow durum? Well, maybe you want to lock some of this in, because if we all jump into durum and we have a good crop, God help us. It's no different with the board there, without the board there. The only difference with the board there, they might only take 70% of what you have to offer, try to hold the rest off the market to hold the price up. In an open market, there won't be that there. You know, you'll voluntarily probably at some point bail and decide to hold product over because the price will be so low. Wheat doesn't matter. We're not going to kill the wheat market in the world because the wheat market's way bigger than what we are. But durum, we're such a big player in the world market, such a big percentage of the export market, that if we do, in fact, grow 5 million acres of durum and have a good crop, and a few other places like the U.S. also ramp up, and there's no drought in North Africa, it might not be a pretty market a year from now. We always, as producers, and I've been guilty of the same thing, end up chasing last year's winners. You look at the price, man, I want to grow some of that. Well, probably there was a premier in Saskatchewan named Grant Devine, and he wasn't always universally loved or revered. But one of the things he said sometimes was seed a cheap seed. Because if you're seeding something that's cheap, it's because it's not in demand and people aren't growing as much of it, and probably that's, that old axiom probably has some validity over time. I think the barley market's really been messed up for malting barley. And I think that a lot of producers have been really disappointed with the contracts and how people have, companies have performed on contracts. I don't know whether it'll be better or worse without the Canadian Wheat Board involved. Certainly there's got to be a place for some malting barley out there. But I sense a lot of disenchantment. And I think this will be one where as soon as there's royal assent on that Marketing Freedom Act, hopefully by Christmas time, there's going to be companies out there offering contracts. And you'll be able to assess, do you want to lock in some? Does it have an active God clause? What if the quality isn't quite there? What are the ramifications going to be? So there'll be a number of companies doing that, and you might even see the new voluntary Canadian Wheat Board out in the marketplace offering contracts. I would fully expect to see them try to be active in the market as well. So there's going to be some choices in the new year and a lot of things to consider going forward. There's going to be more flexibility and more decisions to be made. Take a look at some of the current crop prices. And, you can argue exactly where these levels are, and it depends who you're marketing to on what day and what the price did today. But, you could have got $12.50, or maybe you could have got $13 for canola if you'd have done it at exactly the right time, and now it's closer to around 11. Still a good price. Peas have been a real surprise. They've been as high as $9 a bushel. I think you could probably still in this market price probably find $8.50 a bushel for yellow peas. The movement on peas has been great. I think you'll see pea acreage increase. And, there's even some people with the theory that India has been out of the market. If they come back into the market in a major way in the coming months, peas maybe even, have got some upside. I'm not sure I believe that theory, but I know some people that hold out that view. Flaxseed, I assume this isn't a big flaxseed area. Flax is one of the ones that, there's a price posted, but hard to move. I'll show you some numbers later, but one thing that I will berate you guys on is not taking lentils seriously enough. And I'll show you some stats on acreages later. And you might say, well, this is a great year not to be doing red lentils because they're down to 17 cents a pound. Yeah, and certainly that's a disappointing price, but I would suggest a large green lentil, even at 28 cents, maybe 24, 25 cents if you grow a number 2, is still a pretty good moneymaker. There was a lot of people in Saskatchewan grew peas, and then they finally realized, you can substitute peas with lentils, and sometimes the marketplace will pay you $100 an acre to make that switch. If you take a look at all of, take the yield difference into account and your cost difference into account, if you got the gumption to actually grow some lentils from time to time, and maybe this isn't the time to do it, or maybe 2010 probably wasn't the year to do it because it rained and wrecked the lentil quality. And this year, red lentils are low, but what I'm telling you is it's great to have another crop in your arsenal that you can pull out when you got a favorable crop contract, or peas aren't looking so bright. And, there was times when people were making I would suggest $150 an acre more with their lentils than they would with the very best pea crops. So I've traveled in Alberta, and people have often said, oh, well, they don't really grow here. They don't really work here. But did you ever really give them a real good try? I would suggest there's something that could be grown in a lot more areas of southern Alberta. Canary seed is, again, I'll look at the acreages, but very little of it grown here. I do work for the Canary Seed Commission. I was one of the founding directors of the Canary Seed Commission in Saskatchewan, and now I'm executive director of the Canary Seed Commission. One of the main things, and I realize it's not an important crop here, grown entirely for the birdseed market, but we've spent about $1.5 million, and we've got a submission into Health Canada to get human food approval for canary seed. No big history of human food use except some wild health claim stuff that you see in some of the markets. So we knew that there was, we thought maybe there was a place for this in the market, but you got to go through all the novel food stuff. It's cost us about $1.5 million of producer money and government money through the programs we applied to. The submissions going in, toxicology tests, allergenicity tests, nutritional tests, compositional tests, feeding trials. You wouldn't believe what it requires to get human food approval for something. And it isn't even GMO. God help you if it's GMO. Boy, the hoops you got to jump through then are just impossible. But the point is, I think we're going to get human food approval, and we got lucky because as we started looking into it, canary seed is gluten-free. So we think that it will have a place in the human food market going forward. Might take a while to develop it. We don't know how big it will be. We need a champion in the industry that will look into it and decide they want to use canary seed. But that could change it from a crop that's 300,000 or 400,000 acres almost entirely into Saskatchewan into something that's grown more widely. The other one I wanted to talk about was mustard. Condiment mustard is having real difficulty competing with canola, particularly canola, but also other crops. You know, 36 cents for yellow mustard isn't bad, but it doesn't yield very well. The weed control is tough. And, you know, if you see a yellow field, even in southern Saskatchewan, I bet even in southern Alberta, it's probably canola rather than mustard these days. So we've got work to do in mustard. And I'd like you guys to contribute. I have to talk to Ryan Mercer a little bit more about this, but about 75% of the mustard is grown in Saskatchewan, but you guys grow about 25%, but you're not pulling your freight because we got a checkoff in Saskatchewan. 0.5% of gross value goes into a checkoff fund. A big chunk of that we give to Mustard 21 Canada Inc. for all the development work, and they get matching contributions from government. We're looking for a way to tap Alberta on the shoulder and say, hey, you're benefiting from the new varieties we got coming. You're benefiting from the stuff we're doing to try to get better weed control in mustard. Can we have a little bit of help here? So that's some of the discussions we're going to have. Just wanted to plant that seed. But one of the exciting things in mustard, you know, the condiment mustard market's got a lot of issues, and if anybody's got questions later, we can delve into them. But one exciting thing that's happening is a brand new type of mustard, and again, this has been researched with a lot of grower money out of Saskatchewan. It's called Brassica carinata. Carinata is Ethiopian mustard. They've had germplasm from this and working with Ag Canada in Saskatoon for about the past 10 years. At first it was way too long maturing, but they've ratcheted it back to it's fairly reasonable. The current variety yields 10 or 20% better than Cutlass Oriental mustard, so the yield is decent, strictly being developed for industrial use. The military in the US and in Canada wants to use biofuel as jet fuel in their aircraft. Even the commercial airlines want to have an element of biofuel in their airlines. In fact, Europe is coming up with a rule that you can't land there eventually in Europe unless you got some biofuel in the tank. Carinata, because of how the fatty acid chains break off, and I don't understand fatty acid chains very well, is very well suited to drop in biojet fuel production. Another one that is Camelina. Camelina, you know, wasn't always a happy experience. You know, they tried to push that crop, and it's still an option out there, but they kind of got ahead of themselves and had some markets fall through, and producers are feeling a little bit burned. I think Carinata and Camelina both have a place. I think Carinata's got a lot of potential. A company called Agrosoma is working to commercialize, and they'll have the first commercial contracts next year. My understanding is they're going to do a fairly limited acreage, probably only about 5,000 acres, just to get enough to run through the tests, see if the value chain is going to work. But there is a huge demand for this sort of biojet fuel, and I think it's something to keep an eye on. At the Saskatchewan Mustard Development Commission annual meeting, we'll have the guy present from Agrosoma. And there's something, if you want to do some traveling and see what people are doing in the next province over in poor little Saskatchewan, Crop Production Week in January is a great place to come. Just check out cropweek.com. The mustard meeting is on the Wednesday, but there's pulse meetings, canola meetings, seed grower meetings, and a big Western Canadian crop production show. So interesting place to be. I think all of us should travel more. People from Saskatchewan should come out to an event like this more than we do, and people from here should go to, you know, other provinces as well. How many Saskatchewan folks do we have in the crowd here? How many people living in Saskatchewan? Oh, just a smattering out there of people that bleed green and bleed. One thing we got going for us with reasonably decent grain prices is that fertilizer prices have not spiked like they did back in 2008. There's urea up around $900, $950 a ton. Current prices, $650-ish. And this is actually Alberta Ag is one of the few that does some crop input price surveys, and this is taken off the Alberta Ag website. Urea is a similar story. You remember in 2008 where it got right stupid, $13.50 a ton for phosphate. And the current price is high and has increased, but it's been fairly level the last while. What is that? 800 plus a ton? That's still expensive, but at least it isn't 13 or 13.50. And there are some things that get cheaper with time. This is Roundup Weather Max. In some of the competition we've seen in the generics, and it's some of the herbicides that have been around a long time, similar to electronics, one of the few things that actually get cheaper with time. Here's what happened in 2011. This is precipitation in that April to June time frame, and this is the area that just was ugly, ugly wet. And a lot of areas ended up with a damn nice crop with really good quality and pretty decent prices, going to make some money. But this area, a lot of those guys weren't able to participate, just weren't able to get a crop in the ground. By the end of the growing season, and this is April 1st to the 1st of August, you can see that it had kind of evened out. That really wet area still showed up as wet, but everybody else, hey, average to above average precipitation. And then September came along, a nice, warm, great harvest September, and it ended up being a pretty darn nice year. But one thing that I flag on the radar screen is there is precipitation September 2nd to November 30th. Lethbridge is one of the few places where precipitation's actually been normal. And some in south central Saskatchewan has been, a little bit below normal, about normal. But man, what a wide range of Western Canada is actually below normal or well below normal for fall precipitation. So we live in a strange, strange country. We can go from flood to drought in a single year. And I know it's too early to put much store into this, but man, I feel a whole lot more comfortable with a soil profile that's full of moisture rather than one that isn't, coming from the dry, dry region. I'm just across the border in Saskatchewan where my farm is at Cabre. Here's a comparison I like to throw out. How many guys have cows back home? How many livestock producers in the crowd? Okay, I'm only going to piss off a few people. Maybe. $250,000 in gross sales is not a very big farm, obviously. But $250,000 in gross sales is kind of an interesting number. And if you start looking at the stats and going through them, if you got a farm that's earning $250,000 or more in gross sales, that farm, that family tends to get most of their income from the farm. If you're below $250,000, as a lot of farms are, they tend to get most of their income from off-farm employment. So how much production do you need to make $250,000 gross? Well, assuming $6 wheat and assuming a pretty average or mediocre yield of 32 bushels an acre, you need about 1,300 acres of wheat. If you're able to sell your canola at about $12, and even if you only grew 30 bushels an acre, you need 700 acres of canola. So a 1,000-acre farm in wheat, canola kind of a rotation, you'd be kicking around that $250,000 area, right? How many cows do you need? What size of a cow-calf operation do you need to come up with $250,000 in gross sales? Well, I think that's a fairly generous assumption for 550 weight steer and heifer calves at $1.60. That's pretty good quality to get even $1.60, even though prices are up, profitability up, people in the livestock industry finally making so much money. But you still need more than 300 cows to reach that $250,000. Now, it's a little different in Alberta, no doubt. But where I come from, if you got a 1,000-acre grain farm, you're small fry. But if you got 300 plus cows, you get to wear a pretty big hat on Coffee Row. You're kind of a big deal in the cow industry. What I'm saying is that it's great to see some profitability in the livestock sector. But if you're going to have real good farm income, real good family income, you need a lot of the buggers to be making much money. We can argue about this later over coffee if you like, but I don't think people sometimes look at it that way, just what the relative profitability of the two actually is. Now, I've been using this slide since about 2006, and getting into trouble with it ever since 2006. I just tend to be a bit of a skeptic on this whole global warming thing, and I know there'll be people that want to take me to task for that. Are we warming? And if we are, is it a bad thing? And if we are, is it really man-made, or is it other reasons? So I got a whole bunch of questions. Call me a dinosaur, okay? But it is affecting policy. You know, the whole idea, you guys in Alberta are being paid for carbon credits. We thought everybody in the country was going to be paid for carbon credits and for, you know, direct seeding and minimum tillage and all those good things. The Americans aren't going to go with that kind of a cap and trade system and carbon trading. It looks less and less likely that that's going to happen, less and less likely that the feds are going to go that way. But the whole environmental movement is still going to affect our lives. Biodiesel going into Europe, if it's canola, or even if it's canola going into the States, has got to be certified, got to run through a life cycle analysis to prove its sustainable production. So there's all these sorts of rules to do with the environment, and some of them arbitrary, that is going to make an impact on our lives. Agriculture and the environment are indeed linked. I like looking at farmland prices wherever I go, and I won't belabor these numbers. And, you know, some of these estimates are, you know, I think they get the trends right, whether they've got the absolute numbers right. But the point is, you might say land prices never dropped. Well, go back to the 80s. And high interest rates and poor returns. And land prices actually absolutely cratered in Saskatchewan. And they also dropped in Alberta. Not as strong here because you got so many other pressures on your farmland here. Since the early 90s, land prices have continued to increase, and I'm not sure whether they got all of the numbers right. You know, you can't really buy very much for farmland in Saskatchewan for $500 an acre anymore. Most dirt that you'd want to own to grow crops on is $8,000, $9,000, $1,100. You hear a little bit at 13, 14. I heard a section sell near Moose Jaw because lentils have treated that country well at $2,000 an acre. That's the highest I've heard for dry land without other influences involved. Now, I don't know what land is worth here. What are we, 1,500 to 2,000 on dry land in this neck of the woods? You guys are, is it higher? I see people laughing at me, so I have no idea here whether I'm in the ballpark or whether I'm not. Land prices obviously much higher here. I guess we all have this assumption that land will always increase, and I think it's got a real good opportunity of being a great long-term investment, but that's the thing. It's become an investment. And in Saskatchewan, we have investment companies that are buying up land and renting it back to farmers because they believe it's a great investment. And we have farmers that own land as an investment, maybe even loan land they don't farm as an investment. Frankly, if you've got some money to invest, where are you going to put it to earn a decent return? You're going to put it in a GIC and earn less than the rate of inflation? You're going to throw it in the stock market and see it, you know, get shot and killed and trampled and that volatility? So we understand land. We use land to make a living. So we're in the land business. But, you know, will land always go up? Well, I hope it always does. But it is not just productive value. It's also speculative value. And, you know, we're still cheap compared to other jurisdictions. There's the average prices according to Stats Canada in the provinces across the country, but, you know, we hear the stories about what it costs in the U.S., where you see some land in Iowa that might be $8,000 or $10,000 an acre, and I saw a story that the top cash rent paid on good corn growing ground for the upcoming year as high as $500 an acre cash rent. Now, that isn't no average, but those sorts of stories leak out. Man, you know, we're starting to look big money. Here's some of these acreage numbers, and you guys grow lots of peas. You know, Saskatchewan's got a bigger acreage, so we grow more, but you're certainly into growing peas. You grow about a quarter of the country's mustard. Now, these are 2010 numbers. Some of the 2011 numbers I've got to dig down into them a little bit further to get 2011 numbers. And that's why I'm saying that, geez, it would be nice to find a way for the mustard industry in Alberta to contribute to the research that's going on mustard so that we can move farther, faster in better varieties that yield better, that still have good quality traits, and also get some better weed control options within mustard. Canary seed, according to the stats, there's virtually none here. And the price of canary seed right now, 27 cents a pound. We wish it was higher. We're having trouble in the Mexican market because of quarantine weed seeds. They're being really stupid about it. But it's still an interesting option and something you could put in your toolbox. You may say, oh, it probably doesn't grow here. Well, it grows from Swift Current to Tisdale to Arborfield to Regina. So I think it probably would grow somewhere in Alberta if you wanted to work in this market. It's very limited right now because it's specifically a birdseed market. But as we get human food approval, maybe it'll open up the opportunity to grow a larger acreage for that market. This is 2010 lentil numbers, and our lentil acreage was down in Saskatchewan too, and I'm sure yours was down this year as well. But 3.3 million acres in Saskatchewan and only 140,000 here in Alberta. I think lentils could be part of your toolbox and part of your considerations from one year to the next. I know you face some challenges because the buyers for the product tend to not be here. They tend to be out in Saskatchewan. You're going the wrong way. But still, product moves all over heck. I wasn't there to load them. The trucker had to start the auger himself. I'm really hoping he didn't have any problems at my little farm operation loading chickpeas today at Keebury. Those chickpeas are on their way to St. John, Manitoba. So they're, special crops go all over heck. And when they told me the price they could pay, they didn't say where they were going. That's the price picked up at the farm, 49 to 50 cents a pound. So, lentils, large greens or reds, yeah, you might not have a processor close, but I would suggest that in many ways, Alberta, that's one of the things they've maybe missed in the whole equation. Why that lentil thing happened, I'm not sure. Was it because the varieties were coming out of Crop Development Center at the university? Was it because Sask Pulse Growers had the levy and the promotion? Was it the extensionists that talked more about lentils? Was it because we had a little bit less government money? Was it because we weren't so strong into livestock as Alberta? Maybe a whole bunch of reasons. But people persevered with lentils in Saskatchewan. The varieties are much better than what they used to be. And in a lot of years, lentils is actually the top money producing crop. Won't be this year. Probably with the quality problems wasn't in 2010. But if you go back to 2008, 2007, top money producing crop, even beat those 50 and 60 bushel canola crops. So what's the future hold? Where are we at? Now for that little guy, he'd probably be better if he fell off after going about 3 feet. That's probably the kindest thing that could happen, eh? And I know people like to talk about the growing world population and the growing demand and how agriculture is the place to be, and I have a lot of sympathy for those arguments. On the other hand, I hear people say, there's actually lots of production capacity. If Kazakhstan, Russia, Ukraine get their act together, if we continue to get genetically modified crops and more production capacity and grow more on the land base we've got, there's quite a bit of production capacity there. And how many of us are actually starving to death? There's more of us dying from obesity-related illnesses than there are starving in the world. There's a whole lot of waste and stuff that's going to landfills and stuff that we don't clean up our plate. We were always, as kids, if you didn't clean up your plate, you got smacked behind the ears, but now kids don't clean up their plate. There's a lot of waste. In third world countries, developing nations, there's lots of waste, lots of rodents, and lots of spoilage. So there's room, many people say, to make major gains there. I think certainly agriculture and nutrition and health are going to be linked like never before. Pulse crops to lower your glycemic index, to ward off type 2 diabetes. People worry about these things now. There's a lot we can do with our diets to take pressure off healthcare costs. And agriculture and the environment are linked because, as you've heard, consumers care about how it's produced, where it comes from, is it safe, what's in it. So when you add up all these factors, what is the future? Well, I still do think that number one point trumps all the others. That the world and the economy and the money and the demand for food is going to make agriculture an exciting place. But I do think there's going to be bumps along the way. Not every year will be positive, and there's always some unintended consequences, and you're still in a competitive business as you're competing for buying land, renting land, competing for the markets that are out there. So what about the whole Canadian Wheat Board change? As mentioned, I do some work for the Inland Terminal Association. I wish I had all the answers. My personal view is that if the Wheat Board directors, when they saw a Conservative majority government elected and the Conservative majority government said we are going to change the single desk, those directors that didn't agree should have said, we don't agree, but you're going to do this. To be a viable entity moving forward, the Wheat Board needs this, this, and this. Let's talk about those things. Man, I think we'd have been a whole lot further ahead now than where we are. Hopefully the court challenge that was heard today won't go anywhere. Most people give it very few chances of proceeding, because whether the Wheat Board was the right way or the wrong way with the single desk, the fact is the change is coming and we better get at it and get it figured out. Because the longer time goes on, the less time we got to figure out things like rail car allocation and contracts and knowing what the new system is going to look like. People will have more flexibility in how they market. There'll be more transparency in the contracts you sign. That doesn't mean that everything will be rosy. And for instance, we could have some hiccups. If people think that Durham is such a great deal, yeah, and it doesn't even have a wheat board, and Murad Al-Khatib is building a new pasta plant. Well, okay, but you're still only going to sell so much durum for pasta and couscous around the world. So we have to be careful of what we do. There's new futures contracts coming out from ICE Futures Canada for wheat, durum, and a revamped barley contract. The people I talk to say, I'm not sure, they're not sure whether the durum one is going to work. They're just worried there's not going to be enough liquidity, and unfortunately there's no other durum futures contract anywhere to base durum futures off of. So that could be a problem. They're going to try to launch this durum contract. You know, Brad Vannon of ICE Futures is putting a brave face on it, but there's a lot of people thinking the durum one will have trouble. A lot of people, though, think a made in Canada spring wheat contract might be a real viable tool to use. Grain movement. Okay, since there's no wheat board, you can sell all your wheat whenever you want. Right? That'd be easy. It's just you just truck it to the elevator whenever you want. Well, I guess you can truck your canola. You can probably find a canola, home for canola, pretty much whenever you want. Sometimes you sell it and it doesn't go right away like it's supposed to. But you know what happens when everybody wants to sell at the same time? The basis goes really ugly to encourage us not to all sell at the same time. So we're going to have about the same amount of grain to move through the same railway system, through the same port system, so it all can't go at once. There's going to be, if you think that suddenly all the problems are solved, it won't. And in fact, I worry that the railways haven't played this game before. There's been rules and regulations and formulas for figuring out wheat board, car allocation. I think it could be a little bit of a rough road trying to get the whole system talking to each other when we first start out with this in the new crop year. I worry that there could be bumps along the way. We'll figure it out. But there could be some issues along the way. Secondary processing. I know a lot is made of the new durum plant and pasta plant in Regina. That's a great thing. The minister likes to talk about the expansion at Ryer Malting at Alex, Alberta. And we'll see some of those things. I just don't think we're going to see secondary processing take off tomorrow. I think it'll be long and gradual because those are pretty mature markets we're working in. And you got to steal market away from somebody else to make it happen. I think you'll see fewer grades of wheat. I don't think you're going to see as many protein breaks. You might not get paid for 0.1% protein anymore. It might be meat 12.5 for this contract, meat 13 for this contract. And if you're 1 or 2 points over, you don't get paid extra for it. Because I just can't see as much segregation into the system going forward as what we've had in the past. And the railways still need to pick up their game. And sometimes they do well, and then sometimes they do not do well. And shippers and railways do not have a balanced playing field. Because the railway will say, hey, we're dropping off 100 cars, load them by next Tuesday. So you get all your people in place to load those cars, and then the cars don't come. Oh, do you get to charge a penalty against the railways for missing what they said? No. But if you don't load those cars in time when they arrive, do you get a penalty? Oh, yes. So it's not a balanced agreement out there in very many ways. The federal government, to its credit, has come out with a whole plan for rail service agreements to sit down and negotiate this in a balanced fashion. It'll take a while to get it in place, but there's a lot of hope that will bring more balance into the whole grain handling system. 5 minutes left. Just want to touch on a pet peeve of mine, and I know we heard some good presentations on succession, but oftentimes we go to presentations and we hear about the nuts and bolts of how you do tax planning and BICO and LandCo and NewCo and FarmCo and all this stuff, and that's useful. But the basic problem is we don't communicate as families. And you see it when you go, a half section of land comes up for sale and you go to your spouse and say, geez, dear, I think we should put a bid in on that. And your spouse says, what the hell are you doing? We haven't paid for the last land you bought. And who are you going to have to help work? You haven't, the kids aren't coming back home. And you hardly got harvest done last year anyway. So, we don't even, within families, we don't necessarily have all our goals and objectives. We don't know whether or not the kids are coming back to farm or not. And I think that's very important because you see too many families that end up looking like this. They don't have lunch, they don't have Christmas dinner together because they don't get along. It was a fight over the estate or who got to farm or succession planning or a fight between dad and his son or whatever. We need to communicate and we need to work it out. Now, having said that, I got 3 boys and they help me out as they can. They all have jobs in the city and I haven't got it figured out. We don't have it figured out exactly either. I do have an ace in the hole, though, because this guy is a professional actor. You know what that means? It means mostly he's unemployed. Works contract to contract. Even when he is working, he isn't earning much money. So, geez, the farm doesn't look like a bad place to go from time to time. So we'll see how this all turns out. So don't want to preach and pretend I've got it all figured out, but I think families really need to talk about goals and objectives and aspirations. And most of us want to see a next generation involved, if we've got that option. But sometimes we don't communicate it well, and we don't manage the transfer of management and decision-making very well. So, ladies and gentlemen, I really appreciate come out and take part in your conference, hear your great speakers. Any questions or challenges or comments, or would you prefer to move on and chat during break? Nobody waving their hand frantically, wanting my hide. It's time to tell you one. When I was introduced, I was really pleased. I don't think the term consultant was used. Do you know what the definition of a consultant is? Someone that knows 101 ways to make love, but doesn't know any women. Or if you get a bull that tries to jump over a barbed wire fence and doesn't quite make it, what do you have? A consultant. That's me, your friendly neighborhood consultant. Ladies and gentlemen, thanks very much for being such a kind audience.